topics session, oral session, the final session for today. The first presentation is about using universal design for learning, UDL principles to embed inclusive practice in academic support for neurodivergent postgraduate researchers. The presentation is by Andrea MacLeod, together Sandland and Hall from University of Birmingham Autism Center for Education and Research, United Kingdom. Please.
So you've got three of us presenting today. I'm going to introduce, and then I'll bring on my colleagues afterwards. We're going to try and do a really swift transition across. So we're presenting on some initial research that's kind of snowballed as we've gone on. And it came together right from the beginning of being an autistic, ADHD, dyslexic PhD student sitting there Viva with my supervisor and my internal examiner. And we met afterwards and reflected on our own practice, and it's gone from there, basically. So we started off very early on just thinking about what happened, what went right, what went wrong, why did it happen, and then started looking further afield. So the initial part of our work was some research that we undertook at the university, where we met with students and staff and reflected on their experiences during their doctoral viva and using reasonable adjustments. And we got some really wealth of information, which we haven't got time to go over. So there's lots of stuff on the slides that I probably won't mention, so I apologise. But the information we were getting was really complex. We wanted it to be nice and neat, and we wanted to really unpick it and have lots of things we could do, but we were coming to the realisation that everything was impacting on each other. So we were getting feedback from students and staff that actually as a PGR, nothing's really specific for a PGR. It's all undergraduate structures, it's all undergraduate language. There's very little about neurodiversity at all. When we did the literature review, actually, there's not even an agreed definition of neurodiversity in higher education. There's no agreed categorisations in the data, so there's no tracking of data. Most universities don't even record if students have reasonable adjustments in their viva, so we've got no way of knowing what's going on. Staff were reporting they really want training. They wanted to be doing the best for their students, but they couldn't. They hadn't got the training for it. And students were talking about, I might get reasonable adjustments, I might not. I'm going through what we're classing a cost-benefit analysis. Is asking for them better, or is there a risk? And quite often there was a risk when because there were things like ableism and the paperwork and the effort of self-advocacy that goes alongside it. So we were getting all this data, and there was a wealth of data, but as I say, what the issue was that one theme impacted on another theme. And that theme was impacted by another theme, so we couldn't see it in a nice, neat pattern. So it snowballed into something bigger, which Andrea's going to pick up for you now.
Thank you, Barbara. It's very much passing on the baton. This has been a collaborative project from the very beginning, so it felt appropriate to do co-presenting, which is challenging in a tight time scale. So I'll try and keep it to script. So, I'm going to explain now where the activism comes into this. Firstly, it's worth just noting that it's been a very small project with a tiny amount of funding and a timescale of less than a year. Technically, it was educational enhancement rather than pure research per se, and so we were really keen to have tangible outputs coming out from the project. As we've listed on the slides, there's some evidence that individual adjustments, such as reasonable adjustments, are quite limited in enabling inclusion in higher education, particularly for students with less visible conditions such as autism and neurodivergence. I'm not going to repeat what's on the slide, I'll let you read it, but all of this means that there are lots of students who are neurodivergent and have associated learning needs, but who do not have formalised adjustments. In relation to doctoral students and the staff support, we came to understand through the project that as well as those general issues with the reasonable adjustments, there were some that were very specific to them. So some key points, that relationships between doctoral students and the staff supporting them are more intense because they're more focused on fewer staff. And so they're more dependent on the skills and knowledge of those staff. If you have a good member of staff supervising you, great, but it's the luck of the draw. Doctoral students, and we've had this before from Monique and others today, are almost by definition interested in pursuing academic careers. So disclosure potentially impacts not just their studies, but also employment prospects, which is no small thing in such a challenging environment. And from our project, we already knew there was an issue with reasonable adjustment plans and vivas. This was our experience. So the first year is too soon to talk to a poor doctoral student about the practicalities of what their viva is going to be like and what adjustments they might need in any meaningful way. But by the time you come to their final year, that's a really difficult thing a conversation to have in terms of the bureaucracy. You might want to talk about the adjustments, but going through that formal process of having that enacted in a reasonable adjustment plan is another task at a really stressful time for students. And through the work that we did on the project, we could actually see that many of the adjustments that were being written into plans were actually just good inclusive practice, which made us ask why they needed to be written into individual plans. So from all of this, we concluded that to focus on adapting reasonable adjustment plans would just really be tinkering at the edges of what was needed, as it would only impact on those who already had formal reasonable adjustment plans, who also had the confidence to use them and to share them with members of staff, and who had supervisors who were themselves knowledgeable and confident in what those should mean in terms of their own practice. And this brought us to Universal Design for Learning, which I know has already been brought up earlier in the day, or UDL, as a means of moving beyond reasonable adjustment plans towards embedding inclusive practice into the culture of the university more generally. So UDL aims to anticipate and plan for different learning styles and different communication styles at design stage. So it aligns very naturally with a more social model of disability, so it seemed a very natural fit for us. We felt this would provide the potential for a much broader impact, introducing the principles of UDL to key stages and processes of doctoral studies alongside those reasonable adjustment processes and informed by them. So not losing those benefits and those rights altogether, but minimising the need for them, if you like. And so crucially in this way, we hope to address a key underlying philosophy that had really informed our whole project, that higher education needs to be better at nurturing neurodivergent academics to ensure that research is not just informed, but also driven by those with lived experience. So you can see on this slide how we made use of the 3 pillars of UDL, thinking about how to give multiple means of engagement, representation and expression for different learning and communication styles. By focusing on general PGR principles and procedures and embedding UDL into those, we became more ambitious with our aims. We wanted to change practice across the university, and we have a big university. But we hope that less reliance on individual adjustments and explicit guidance on inclusive practice as being standard, rather than as formally agreed in an adjustment plan, could be a positive step away from the ableist culture that, like most universities, pervades our university. So for this, it was really important to take a top-down, bottom-up approach. As Barbara has described, we've been collaborating with stakeholders at ground level to understand the lived experience for neurodivergent students and the staff supporting them throughout the project, but we also now needed to engage the support of university leadership, and ultimately this was critical to the success of the project, and I'll let Neil explain that further.
Well, as Andrea has said, our project was small, but that didn't stop us having grand ambitions, and therefore we made contact with the University Director of Postgraduate Research and our Deputy Pro-Vice Chancellor for Student Experience, and they both bought into the project that we were undertaking. It did happen that we knew them quite well, and so therefore our network had worked very efficiently. So our work would only be meaningful if we fed into the wider university considerations of PGR inclusivity. And to this end, to be brief, Barbara created a fantastic specific resource which was shared with the Student Disability Service. We got buy-in from them, and this discusses different aspects of the psychology of learning, differing forms of strengths and needs of neurodivergent students across higher education. So our recommendations, as you can see here, were presented to the University Director of PGR, who then took this to the University's Research Committee. We've got a newly formed doctoral school, which is a part of that research committee. We've presented to them, they've bought into these matters. So there are three areas that we are focusing on at the moment about administrative, practice guidance, and effectiveness evaluation. Our next steps is to try to keep the momentum going for change, and so therefore we're targeting our code of practice for research degrees at the university. So we have designed a series of next steps, future projects. These are listed there if you can have a look at those. But one thing that we are absolutely determined to do is to ensure that we capture meaningful data from those who are the subject of the focus of our project. In other words, neurodivergent PGR students. I shall leave it there, but our aim is checking that policy translates into practice through the collection and analysing of meaningful data within what we're going to style a bioecological systems framework mapped through Bronfenbrenner. Barbara somewhere.
Behind you. You get me back right at the end. I just wanted to sort of come together and say we don't want to end, and we're really keen to collaborate with people. So we've got email addresses on there if other people want to collaborate on this type of project. But also to really stress that actually what we've done is quite unique in bringing together these different standpoints. And I think actually looking at one issue from those different perspectives has been really fundamental, and it's something that I would really like to see welcome more. We talk about the autistic voice, but actually there's a lot of different voices that have different perspectives, and bringing that together can be quite powerful. And we've got 1 second left. That's quite good. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So it is time for questions. If you are, you need to raise your hands. We do not accept online questions. So please, brief, short questions. So I have a question. Thank you for this model. We want to spread in other universities. So which is your suggestion for starting this process in other university? Where to start?
It's a difficult question, really, because the data about students in higher education is quite hard to come by accurate data anyway, and it's even more difficult for doctoral students because there are different requirements in terms of the data that is collected. And as we said, there are problems with diagnosis. But I think I would probably suggest starting almost at our endpoint by looking at the documents that students have and examiners have, and seeing how they take account of people with different learning styles and different communication styles, and to what extent they do. If you can get hold of them, have a look at the formal adjustment plans and see what they say, because for all sorts of valid reasons, adjustment plans are very much cut and paste. And so by looking at that, you can really quite easily see where there are things that just should be there for everyone. And I'll just say one more thing, because I know we're conscious of time, but when we were doing the kind of collaboration with senior leadership, somebody who had recently been through a Viva process as a student, as a doctoral student, but who wasn't neurodivergent as far as we're concerned, but he said this would have really helped me because I felt really anxious, and the kind of things, the kind of reminders to examiners that were written in would have been helpful. And, you know, this is the really key principle of universal design for learning, is that it goes way beyond targeting people with a diagnosis.
Thank you.